All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Don't know why my camera keeps blurring. Oh, we'll see what happens. So anyway, we're going to get started, and today we're going to continue on with our exercise 203. I know some of you emailed me with some questions about 202. Happy to talk through what questions you have, but I want to keep moving forward with little steps. The good news is there's some repetition today of what we did before, so we'll kind of go through it again. I'm going to start normally I would already have Rhino pulled up, but I'm going to walk through that login process just in case anybody's struggling with that as we get part of the demo. So I'm going to share my screen. And then give me a second to get a little bit organized here. All right, and let me get my chat window up here. Sorry, bear with me. Perfect. I like to have things up on the other monitor as we get started. So I went ahead and I pulled up our exercise 203 little setup here just to make sure that you guys could see it. We'll bring it up again. This obviously is going to walk us through step by step with a lot of references. One thing I do want to point out is whenever there's a typed command, it'll show up like this, where it's in this little box that you know that I'm typing it in. And that's the reason I want to do that, is I want to make sure that it's really clear for you when I'm typing something in specifically. So let's go ahead and log in to our remote desktop. So I'm going to open a new tab here and type in idm.dvc.edu. And you would think that it would load. Come on. Been having internet issues this morning. Let's try it again. There we go. Perfect. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on the ET Lab 01 here, and we'll go ahead and launch. Now I'm going to open it in the client. So go ahead and say allow, and that will open up the client piece of software rather than having it open up in my web browser. And I strongly encourage you to do it that way because it just seems to be a little bit more stable than the web browser. Though I've had students who have done it with the web browser and been just fine. So let's give that a little bit of time to get itself started up here. And like I said, I generally would have all this up and running, but I wanted to walk through the process just to make sure that we're making sure that we get it all set up the same way every time. So we'll give it a little bit more time here. Perfect. We get our little warning. I'm going to go ahead and sign in with my Insight email address. And I need to grab my password here for just a second. And that's, oops, wasn't quite fast enough. Let me do it one more time here. Now, remember, for you guys, it's going to be insight.4cd.edu instead of email.4cd.edu. That's because I'm a faculty person. It's slightly different. So we have to give it a moment to finish its installation here. And then it's just a matter of clicking through all the next prompts here. It's almost done here. There we go. And then we can open my OneDrive folder. I'm going to leave that open there for a second. And while we're waiting, I'm going to go ahead and pull up in the remote desktop, even though I could reference it on my home computer. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the website for our exercise here. Perfect. And so I'm going to go to our assignments here. And I'm going to go to exercise 203. And there it is. So I can reference this, which is always good. So we'll come back and we'll reference that a little bit. We're slowly starting to download references to all the stuff that I have stored on my flash drive here. The key one for me, I need to get the keystroke logging up so that you guys can see that. So give it a second so that it can finish its sync here. And I guess while I'm waiting for that to finish its load, I'll go ahead and open up Rhino. So I'm going to double click on Rhino to get started here. There we go. And on this splash screen with Rhino, when we start working to start, we're just going to say a large object inches template. And it didn't let me do it. I'm going to close all the V-Ray toolbars except for the big one. And we'll drag it. See how that blue line appears? That'll dock it right here at the top. So since I lost the template screen, it didn't let me pick it. I'm going to go to File and then New. And I'm going to make sure I'm choosing the large object inches template. And I'll say Open. There we go. So this will show as inches down here in the lower left corner, just to make sure that I'm in the correct units. So it's always a good idea to double check that. Let's check on, yeah, good, there we go. I'm gonna open up this. This is my keystroke logger, and that just helps you guys see what it is that I'm doing. So bear with me while I get a few little settings set here. All right, oops. There we go. That's good. Let's change the mouse. I like to use red and blue. So thank you for your patience on this. There we go. We'll go ahead and click on Save. Good. Now my options are locked in here, so you can see what clicks I make. You'll get little circles whenever I make a click. A right click will be blue. A left click will be red. And then you'll also see as I start to type things, those will be there as well. So as we get started with our exercise 203, I'm actually going to open up our exercise 202 from last time. So let me go to File and then Open. And I'm going to go into my OneDrive, and hopefully you have some organization here. I'm going to go into my 202, and I'm going to open up one of these. I'll say Open. And we'll give it a little bit of time here. The reason this delay is happening is probably because it hasn't officially downloaded the file yet. That's one of the challenges with OneDrive. So a lot of times what I'll do is in my folder, when I get set here, I would go in and take the whole file. This would be the folder from last. I'll say always keep on this device. It'll download all the files. And then we can go also do that for exercise 203. That's what we're working on today. Just make sure everything gets downloaded correctly. So it looks like Rhino's having some issues. Let me just go ahead and come in here and we'll, oh, and came back right before I opened it. All right, so there it is. That was the file that we were working on. As I move forward, I'm gonna go ahead and do a Save As. So I'll go to File and then Save As. And we'll put this into the 203 folder. There it is. And this would be fall of 2022. So I'm gonna change that. There we go. And I'll go ahead and click on Save. So that then brings me to where we left off in exercise 202, where we now have the floor plan. And so today, what we're going to try to work through is how do we start to build this out in 3 dimensions? So how do we create a 3-dimensional model of this? So we'll do a little bit of, in SketchUp terms, a little bit of pushing and pulling. But before we officially get into that, I want to talk about drawing a little bit of a side elevation here. So we kind of see what's happening. This is very rudimentary. We're not talking roof or anything fancy, but just a little bit of a side elevation. So I'm going to go ahead and use my polyline tool right here to give myself a bit of a reference. It looks like I'm not snapping yet, so let's go ahead and turn on my end snap, my mid snap, and my perpendicular snap. Those are the 3 that I tend to leave on. And we'll come down here, an arbitrary amount, doesn't really matter how far I go, and we'll come across. Now I'm using references here. So if I hover over that corner point, you see that the little dot in the corner turns white. When that happens, I can pull straight down and I get that white reference line. And then because I have perpendicular snap turned on, it will stop at a nice perpendicular line right there. Now the height of this wall that I'm going to create, we're just going to do a basic 8 feet. So I'll go up by 8 feet. And then I'll come over, and again, I'm using reference points here, so I can come over at perpendicular, and I'll come down to right there. That gives me the basic elevation view. I also need a line, and I'm going to use, again, those reference points. So I hover over that corner right there, get that line, pull straight down till I snap, and I'll snap again to perpendicular. So that's giving me the outer boundaries, but also where this corner turns, since this face is in front of this face. So next thing I need to do is I need to actually draw out what the windows would look like. So I can use my rectangle tool to draw a window. I could also pull lines. So I could just pull a line straight down, and I'll delete these afterward. I pull another line straight down. It gives me some reference as to where those lines would be. And let's say that the window is 3 feet off the ground. I think this was a kitchen, so let's do a little bit more. Let's go at 42 inches off the ground. That would be the bottom of the window. And the top of the window is probably at 6'8". That's a standard head height for an 8-foot wall. So let's do 6 feet 8 inches. Like that. Now it looks like somehow I messed up and this is too tall. And so this does happen. I'm going to measure the distance from here to here, and I can do that under tools, I believe. And I always type it in. It might be, that's a good question. Those are dimensions. Well, let's go ahead and type in distance. So I'm going to type in distance. There it is. I'll hit enter on the keyboard. Let me check. Somehow I got that. I bet it's 16 feet. 142. Huh? That's weird. Try it one more time. I want to change my units into feet and inches. And let's measure that again. Well, somehow I got it at 11 feet, 10 inches. So that's not good. So you guys get another strategy here. If I want to change the size of this, of course, I could come down here and just draw a new line. So I could go up here by 8 feet. That's better. And we'll come over like that. Or I can take this rectangle and I can actually scale it. And Rhino has 3 different scales. So I can go to transform and you look at scale. There's scale 3D, scale 2D, and scale 1D. The difference being that 1D only scales in one direction at a time. 2D scales in 2 directions at a time. And 3D scales in all 3 dimensions at a time. So in this scenario, we could do a scale 1D, and we would want to change this distance. So if I click here and I click to right there, I want to change this distance. And you see that nothing else is changing, but I could change that to 8 feet, and that would be my correct size. It doesn't really matter how you do it, but that's just an alternate way of creating it. Let me delete this extra line here. There we go. And now it's time to kind of clean this up a bit. So let me go ahead and do some trimming. I'm going to go up to Edit, and I'm going to choose Trim. It's going to say Select Cutting Objects. Now, when I look at cutting objects, these are the objects that are doing the cutting. So this line and this line, for example, would be cutting off these pieces. So I'll select those as my cutting objects. And then I can go ahead and trim off this, 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 and this to get the shape of my window. So alternatively, let's explore that trimming a little bit more. If I went into trim or typed edit trim, I could also type all, which is going to select everything, but the results, oops, let me jump back here. It shouldn't have jumped forward like that. There we go, trim, type all. It's going to select everything as the cutting objects. When I hit enter, then I could go in and pick any object to get rid of. The difference here is if I pick this, for example, and I click here, notice that it's going to trim it so that this line segment remains. And I'd have to go in and delete that afterward. So by paying attention to our cutting objects, let me jump back here for a second. When I go to trim, if I choose only this and this as the cutting objects, when I go in to do my trim, it's going to get rid of both line segments because the only ones doing the cutting are those two yellow ones that are selected like that. I'll hit enter to finish, and I need to trim one more time for this line. So I'll type trim or go to edit and then trim. I'll select this as my cutting object. I'll hit enter, and then I'll go ahead and trim that segment as well. I'll hit enter to finish. So now I have the first window here. Let's go ahead and join that all together. So I'm going to select it all. Now I mentioned this in the last lecture, but since I'm doing this one live, I want to double remind you here. And that is that if I select from left to right, it's going to select anything that is completely contained within the object. So for example, if I selected just to there, notice, or this is probably better, it's going to select only the top line. So if I'm selecting left to right and I wanted all 4 of those lines, I'd have to make sure that the box completely covers those. Alternatively, if I select from right to left, and this is the same in AutoCAD here, when I select from right to left, anything that the box touches will get selected. So in that scenario, it would select all 3 of those lines. So this way, you'd only get the top line. This way, you get all 3 of those lines. So think about which way you want to make your selections. So I want all of it, so I'm using left to right, selecting everything. And then I'll go up to edit and choose join. And that makes this into one rectangle rather than 4 separate line segments. So I have this window here. I'd like to repeat this window right here. So I can go ahead and do a copy. So remember, there's 2 copies in Rhino. The edit copy is like copying something from one file to another. And the transform copy is to copy something from within the Rhino file to some other place in the Rhino file. If you type copy, it will be the transform copy version. So again, transform copy. And I'm going to pick this window as my reference point, and then I'll come over to this window right here. And that gives me the second window. I didn't have a window drawn over here, but let's say that I did have a window drawn over here. You just do that really quickly. I'll make a line in the middle here. Let me do an offset. I can go up to curve, offset, offset curves. And we're going to do a distance of 24. And I'm going to choose both sides so that we're getting both sides of that. And then I'll go ahead and I will delete this one in the middle like that. I type DEL, but you can also press the delete key on the keyboard. And so now I want a window down here. Well, of course, I could draw it again. So I could use my reference lines and do exactly what I did here, but I already have these windows. So let's use those to get myself set. So I'll take this first one. I'm going to copy it. And again, I'll use this point as a reference. But if I were to come up here, you see the window's not in the right place anymore. So I'm going to hover and then pull down until it's perpendicular, and then we can see that window. Now, the obvious question, though, is that this window is not the same size as that window. So we need to do a scale. So let's go up to our transform, and let's come down to scale, and we're going to do a scale 1D again, because we're only scaling in one direction. And we'll say this distance, so from there to there, needs to get bigger, and we'll use this as a reference. And there it is. Kunal, it looks like you have a question. Your hand's raised.
Sorry. What's the distance that you put your windows up from the ground?
So the top of the window, I did it at 6'8". The bottom, I did it at 42. Realistically, if this was in the bedroom, it would be a little bit taller. So I could use that scale 1D to make the window taller. In the course of what we're doing, I don't really care because this is just about practice. And so whether it turns out accurate or not, buildable or not, doesn't matter at this stage. We're just practicing.
Oh,
So,
cool.
if you did it at 7 feet, that's fine. If you did it at 3 feet, that's fine. Whatever you feel like you want to do is fine with me. So let's practice that scale 1D again. I'll use transform and then scale 1D. And we'll make this window taller. So let's go from there. The new height, let's say maybe it's a 5-foot window. So I'll change to 5 feet. Again, doesn't really matter. What I've done is I've created a very rudimentary, but a south view of this particular floor plan. So let's take a moment and talk a little bit more about layers. So over on the right side of the page, we have some tabs that are available here. Help usually shows by default. I'll make this a little bit bigger so we can see it better. That's the help section. The first one here with the color wheel is just basic properties. So if you were to select an object, let's say I selected that, it'll tell us information about that particular object. The next tab over looks like a little red, white, and blue piece of pie. That is the layers. So right now I have a default layer. Everything that I've drawn is on that default layer. It's the active layer. The color of the layer is black, and you can see some things like line type and whatever. That's not too relevant for what we're doing. But if I want to stay a little bit more organized, I might change the default layer. Let's double click on it to change the name. And maybe I'll call it floor plan. Now, currently, the floor plan and the elevation are both on that layer. So let's make another layer. Let's change the name of this layer 2. I'm going to double click on it. And we'll change the name of that to elevation. Or you could say south elevation. Now, if I want to change an object from one layer to another, I'm going to select the objects. Again, here's our example of the selection. So remember, if I'm selecting from left to right, everything has to be contained. If I'm selecting from right to left, it just has to touch every bit. Okay, and I want to move this onto the elevation layer. I'll do that by selecting it, coming over to my layers, and then right-clicking on the layer that I want it to go to, and choosing Change Object Layer. Alternatively, you could select your objects, go to Properties, and change the layer name for that particular object here. I generally find that it's easier to change the object layer in the layer view. I actually rarely look at the properties view unless I'm looking for something specific. Most of the time, my layers are what are active. We can also change the color of the layer. So if I wanted to see this in, say, red, so I knew what this particular layer's color was, then those lines are going to show up in red. By default, most of the time, the layers are left black. So I could go back and change it to black, and I could say, OK. Again, just more options for you. Okay, so I have this basic elevation. I'm going to make one more layer, this layer 3, and I'm going to call this one 3D for lack of something better. And I want that new layer to become the active layer. So the check mark right now is next to floor plan. I'm going to come down to the 3D layer. I'm going to put a check mark there. Now this is the active layer. I can now turn off the floor plan. I can also turn off the elevation view. So those are on their own separate layers. So let's start thinking about this instead of in the top view in the 2D dimensions. Let's start thinking about it in terms of the third dimensions. So I'm going to double click on top here, my viewport name. And I'm going to double click on perspective instead to make that the active view. Remember, if I'm going to navigate around this active view, I can orbit by right-clicking the mouse. And it's going to let me orbit around. That's different than SketchUp. SketchUp, you have to middle mouse button. For Rhino, you're going to right-click. And then you can zoom in and zoom out using the scroll wheel. Again, I highly recommend. Say that again.
How can you move it from right to left instead of zoom in, zoom out?
Yes. So if you want to do it, if we press the middle mouse button, do they have it there? No, you can set up a customization for that where it automatically goes to the pan. Since I don't have the middle mouse set up on the default, if you come up here into your standard tools, there's a hand icon. If you click on that, you can move it left to right.
Thank you.
If you want to set up that custom middle mouse button, and again, this is, you know, specifics here, you would go into options and hold on, I gotta double check this. It's under mouse, middle mouse button. You can say manipulate view pan. When you say okay, then when you hold down the middle mouse button, it'll let you pan. That's just not enabled by default on these machines. So you would have to do it each time you log in, you'd have to enable that. But if you're used to doing that in AutoCAD, for example, or in SketchUp, then it may be worth it for you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Okay, so what I need to do is I need to start to make this into a 3D object. Now, depending on how we created this object, it may be in nice closed polylines and it may not be. So in this case, this wall starts here, comes all the way around and closes right there. Let me type explode here for a second. If I went to select it and I got individual line segments like that, you're going to want to make sure that it is a nice closed polygon. And I can do that by holding down the Shift key on the keyboard and working my way around my shape here. Once I've selected them all, I can type join. And then up here in the command line, you'll see 10 curves joined into one closed curve. That's what we're after. So let's look at this side here. That one is also a nice closed joined curve. That's good because it'll make my extrusions much, much better. Every once in a while, people will have an issue. I'll do it with this curve here. Let me go ahead and explode. Where they might have overlapping lines. So let me put an overlapping line in here like that. So now there's actually two lines in here. There's this line and there's this line. So when we went to join the objects together, as you select them, you may get a result like this. And when we type join, 10 curves joined into one open curve. Well, the reason that that's an open curve is because it doesn't connect all the way. Even if I came back and selected this curve and then joined again, it looks closed, but you see that it's still showing that it's joined into one open curve. And the problem here is that when I go to extrude it, and I'll come back to this extrude, but I want to illustrate the problem for a second. You'll get this error, includes self-intersecting curves, may produce undesirable results. Even if you say yes and you start to extrude it, you can see that there's actually two surfaces on top of each other right here. See, there's an extra little surface there. And so we don't want that. We want to be clean. So let me get rid of this for right now. Don't worry, we're going to go back to the extrusion. I'm going to come back to my curve here. I'm going to go ahead and explode. And the nice thing about Rhino is you can actually deselect objects by holding down the control key on the keyboard. Oh, that's right. It doesn't work on Zoom. For me on a Mac anyway. So I'm going to have to go around. Let's get rid of that extra little piece here. And then let's go ahead. I'm going to hold down Shift and select all of these pieces.
But how can you see where is the problem other than do a 3D?
Right. So if I went back, let me jump back here for a second to where I had this as a, is it closed now? Hold on, one more. There we go. Okay, so I had this, and when I went to join it, when it didn't, it said it was an open curve. The only way to solve it is to explode it. So I type in explode, or I go to edit and then explode. I deselect, and then I work my way around the curves again. And that's going to be where I'm going to see where the problem is. So as I come around here, all of those are fine. These are fine. That's fine. That's fine. And when I get here, there's actually two objects. So I can see, oh, that's where my problem is. So if I pick this object only and I type join or go to edit join, 10 curves joined into one closed curve. It's not really the end of the world at this point. If you ended up with that little extra extrusion, you can delete it after the fact, but it's part of learning to model clean is making sure you don't have those little overlaps. So I have one nice closed curve here, and I have one nice closed curve here. It's now time to bring these up in the third dimension. So you saw me do it a little bit just as an illustration, but I'm going to use the extrude tool. So if I go up to, let's see, it's under surface, extrude curve, straight. Notice there are other options. We'll get to those a little bit later in the class. So it's surface, extrude curve, straight. It's going to ask me to select what curve to extrude. I'll pick this wall first. I'll hit enter. And we can see that it's starting to make a 3D object. Notice, however, that it's not filled in, right? It's hollow in the middle. So if I want a top on it, I need to look at my options here, and I can say, oh, solid. Yes, I want it to be solid. And now it's going to have a top on it. So at this point, it's just a matter of picking the height that you want. So in this case, it's 8 feet. So I'll type 8 apostrophe followed by enter. And that creates my first wall at 8 feet up. I'm going to do it again with this curve. You can obviously go back up to surface, extrude curve, straight. The other thing is you can type in here, extrude CRV. It's actually a good point to bring up here. When you type in the command line, notice that there's also a pop-up that appears that has all the other extrude commands on it. So you could choose a different extrude command, even if you weren't sure quite what it was. Like if you wanted to extrude a surface, for example, if you didn't remember that you had to add SRF to it, even if you started typing extrude, you could still look in the list and see. In our case, it's extrude curve. Select curves to extrude, that one. Press enter when done. There it is. By the way, on a Mac keyboard, the enter key is labeled return. I know I've had students in the past get confused. It's just the way that they have it set up. I do want to make sure up here that solid is still checked yes, which it is. And I can snap it. I could type 8 feet again, or I can snap it to the finished wall height over here. And there it is. So you can see already that I'm starting to create that three-dimensional set of objects. So we know that on this end and on this wall, we have some windows that have appeared. Well, I could try to draw the window on this, but I've already drawn the elevation down here. Since I've already drawn that elevation, let's use that elevation to our advantage. Right now, that elevation is flat because I drew it flat. So let's rotate it up into the third dimension. So I'm going to go ahead and select it. There you go. And I'm going to use a command called rotate 3D. So I'll go to transform and then rotate 3D. This is an important command to learn. It's a little bit different than a standard rotation. And that is that it's going to ask you first for a rotation axis. So the start of the rotation axis, this is the line around which your objects will rotate. So start of rotation axis, I want it to be the bottom line of this wall. So I'll start it here. And then it's going to say end of rotation axis. I'll pick the end right here. And now I have those two, and it's going to ask me for an angle or first reference point. Well, let's go ahead and use my wall as a reference point. So right there. And then you can see that it starts to rotate the wall. There is a point at which it will snap. That's perpendicular. Alternatively, you could also hold down the shift key as you do it, and then it'll jump straight to 90 degrees if you hold down that shift key. So then I'll click once I have that rotation. So let me repeat that one more time. I'm pressing Control Z to go flat again. I'm going to go up to transform and then rotate 3D. I'm going to pick this line at the bottom here as my rotation axis. So it'll be from here to there. Then I will pick my angle, which would be the height right there, and we'll fold this up until it's vertical. I could also hold down shift to make sure it's vertical. And I will make a single left mouse click like that. So now that my elevation is standing up, it would be nice to take this elevation and basically throw it onto my walls. And so Rhino has a great command for this. It's something that we'll use over the course of the entire semester over and over again because it's a very, very useful command, especially when we have a complex surface and we want to cut it out for example. So what we'll do is we're going to take this shape right here, and we're basically going to throw it at this wall, and it's going to create a curve that's on this surface for us. And we'll do that using what's called the project command. It's under curve, curve from objects, project. Now, in order for this to work, however, we need the view to be perpendicular to the direction we want to throw the window or throw this curve. So right now, if I went up to do it and I said curve, curve from objects, project, it would say select surfaces to, okay, there's my surface. And when I hit enter, I get this error. The projection missed the selected objects. So I need to change my view before I do this. So I'm going to double click on perspective, and I'm going to look down here at either the front view or the right side view. And so in this case, my rectangle is most visible in the front view, and I'm now going to project it from this front view straight till it hits here. So I'll leave all 4 views up so you can see it, but my front view is active, and I've selected the object in the front view. I'll go up to curve, curve from objects, project. It's going to say select surfaces or polysurfaces to project onto. I will select again in the front view. If you switch and select it in the perspective view, it won't work. It needs to be in the front view. I'll pick that first wall, and I'll go ahead and hit enter. And when I hit enter, you'll see that it takes this curve and it throws it so that it hits the wall and makes a curve there and there. Then it keeps going and hits it right there and there, which is particularly convenient. We ended up needing a window there as well. So let's repeat the process with this window. So again, I'm in the front view. I'll select this window. I'll go to curve, curve from objects, project. And I'm once again going to pick the walls. I'll pick the walls. And again, I'm staying in the front view while I do it. And then I'll go ahead and hit enter. And it'll project the window right next to it. Now, in this case, it made great lines here, but over here, I end up with kind of a half a window because it missed the surface, right? Some of the window hit, but not all of it. So in this scenario, it's actually safe to go ahead and delete that. So I'll type DEL or press the delete key on my keyboard, and I can get rid of that particular piece. So now I have those 2 windows. So let's use this last one. Again, I have to double check that I'm in the front view. There I am. Now let's keep it small so you can see all the views at once. There's my object. I'm going to type project. And I'm going to project it onto this side this time. And I'll go ahead and press enter. And there it is. We've gotten 2 copies of the windows. I only drew the window in the front, but it probably has a window on the back as well. So now that we have these curves, let me double click here to get back into the full size view. Now that we have these curves, it's great, but how do we go about actually cutting out a window? Well, on the simplest level, we could take this curve and use it as a trim. So I could use that curve, I could type in trim, and I could get rid of that piece of the wall. Nothing wrong with that. I could then, let me hit escape, I could use this curve right here, which is on the inside of the wall. I could use trim again, and I could get rid of that part of it, in which case I've actually cut all the way through my wall. Now in this scenario though, right, you see that the wall is actually hollow, and we can see in. So I need to close that off with some surfaces. So we've done this before. I could come back up into my surfaces, right? I could create rectangular planes, and I could fill in these inside surfaces. Now to me, that's a lot of work. So rather than do them individually, I might take this curve that I created and this curve here that I created, so the one on the inside and the one on the outside, and then let's use a loft instead. So I'll go to surface and then loft. It's going to ask me where the seam is. That's fine. They're adjacent to each other right there. I'll go ahead and hit enter, and then it fills it in all the way around for me. Right, like that. Let me go ahead and I'm just going to change my view so you can see it. Like that. So it filled it in. So there's nothing wrong with using that as a strategy, but there are other solutions as well. First one is hidden underneath the Boolean controls here. And instead of a Boolean union, we're actually going to use a command called make hole. That's a round hole. Where is it? There it is, make hole. So if I click on make hole, it's going to say select planar closed curves. So there's my planar closed curve. I'll go ahead and press enter when I'm done. Then it says select surfaces or polysurfaces. So let me select the surface in the front here, select the surface on top, select the surface in the back here. Now, if I had done this, and you'll see me do it when I repeat it, I wouldn't have to select it all if I hadn't already trimmed it once. So I now have it. I'm going to go ahead and press enter. Those are all the surfaces. Then it's going to say, what is my depth point? How far do I want this to go? Well, I want it to go all the way so that it goes to the back side of this wall. So I can snap to this window or to the curve on the back side of the wall. It doesn't matter which one. And I'll go ahead and click. And when I do that, it will cut the hole through for me, but it'll also fill it in for me, which is particularly useful. So let's try that again over here. So I can type in make hole, or I can go to my Boolean commands. Again, I'll click the little arrow below and I'll choose the make hole tool. There it is. Select planar closed curve. There it is. I'll hit enter. Select your polysurfaces. There's my polysurface. Press enter when done. And then depth. So I want to select the inside of the wall. There's the inside of the wall. And I can go ahead and cut all the way through it like that. So it's pretty simple once you get the hang of it. And that's why there's a lot of windows on this, because I want you to practice creating these little bits. So there it is. Let's come around to this side. And let's show what some of the other things that you could do. Instead of having a window, maybe you wanted a little niche in the wall. You can do the same thing. Let's use the make hole command right here. Select our planar closed curve. Oops, hold on. Sorry, I had something selected. Let's try that one more time. Make hole. Select planar closed curve. There it is. I'll press enter. Select your polysurface. There it is. I'll press enter. And then this time for depth, instead of going all the way through, I'm only going to go 3 inches. So I'll go ahead and type in 3 followed by the quotation mark for inches. It's going to ask me which side do I want it popping in or popping out. I want it popping in. And now it's going to create like a little niche for me. It's only half the thickness of the wall. So the key here is just making sure that you have that planar closed curve. I can do the opposite, and I could pull this out if I wanted to. Hyla, it looks like you have your hand raised.
Yes, 2 questions. First, I don't understand all the lines that we can see on the house.
These crosses?
Yes, also
Okay.
in the window and on the wall. We didn't draw them.
Correct.
And the second one, it seems like a lot of work of drawing a window. Why from the first step? Why I draw it in the first lesson? If I only use it in the height, so I could.
Or you mean why did we draw it in the 202 where it's on the floor plan?
Yes, it's like I draw the same window 3 times.
No, I get you. I get you. Part of the reason that I have you draw it in the floor plan is I'm trying to get you practice with drawing. So if I were building this house in a 3D model, I would never actually draw the windows on the floor plan. Okay. I just create them. And there actually is a way, and I will show it to you later on in the class. It gets a little too complicated this early, where you can actually draw on the face of your wall, in which case you don't need to rotate. You don't need to draw it flat and rotate. You can just draw right on the wall. But I've found in teaching for so many years that until we get further down the road, that starts to get really confusing early. So I postpone that until a little bit later. People tend to understand drawing flat and rotating a little bit easier.
Okay, thank you.
So coming back to your question, which is a great one about why are all these lines showing up when we started it. So any surface that's in Rhino, so let me go ahead and say I'm going to draw a surface here. Whenever I create a surface, no matter the size, it's always going to be represented by an outline and then a cross across the center of the surface. If I were to switch this view into a rendered view, this view here, those will go away, those lines go away, and we're seeing this as if it were kind of rendered with a material on it. It's like clay right now. But when we're modeling in this shaded mode, it's trying to tell us that this is a surface versus something that's not a surface. So it's a way of identifying the surface. You'll get used to seeing it. Some surfaces can be a little bit more dense in terms of those little curves. So if I were to patch this 10 by 10, you'd see that I get more of a grid on the surface. But again, it's just a way of representing the surface in the view. If I switched into rendered mode, again, that surface would become, just like any of the other surfaces until I select it, in which case I'd see the little X's on it.
Okay.
The other thing that this matters is if we're in wireframe mode, which again starts to look really confusing. It's a way of identifying that this is a surface. So let me again show you. Oops. That's a surface, but this is just a curve. So if we're in wireframe mode, it's hard to tell the difference if we didn't have that little cross, that this is in fact a surface and that this is in fact just a rectangle. So if I were to switch this into shaded mode, you'd see the same thing, where that has a surface to it and this just has a rectangle to it. So it's basically Rhino's viewport showing us what we're seeing. And it's how they've chosen to delineate those objects.
How are you changing it?
The different views. So over here on the left side, where your viewport name is in perspective, that little drop down arrow, we have wireframe. That's this. If we do a drop down further, we have shaded mode. And these are all just viewport styles, so to speak. They're kind of like the SketchUp styles if you've worked in SketchUp before. We have a rendered, which is going to show us kind of what it would look like rendered. You get a little bit of sun and shadow and stuff like that. And then as you keep coming down, you have another one called ghosted. This is where objects are kind of semi-transparent. This is really useful when your models start to get complex, where you want to be able to see through a wall. X-ray is the same thing as ghosted, but it's a little bit more transparent. I don't find it as useful as ghosted. Technical is just another look. There it is. You see we've got the hidden lines are showing up as dotted lines. Where we're seeing the solid lines, they're showing up as solid. Again, just a different look. If we keep coming down to artistic, these are getting more like the SketchUp styles here, where we end up with paper on the background, and a little bit of shading or whatever. Pen is like we were drawing it in pen. The Arctic is kind of halfway in between. We've got a few outlines, but a little bit of shadowing. And the ray traced is for when we are doing final renderings. I have no material, so it's not really useful for that right now. I'll show it to you, but it's not going to look that good. Okay, so I tend to model in either shaded mode or rendered mode. The other thing that's important to tell you in this is that some objects that are visible in shaded mode won't be visible in rendered mode. So certain objects like V-Ray lights disappear in the rendered mode. It's just something to be aware of. We'll get to that a little bit more as we go forward. So hopefully that helps clarify a little bit. Any other questions before I move on? No, those are great questions. Thank you for stopping me.
One more. During the drawing our elevation plan, if it's impossible or if it's important to use our one moment. Polyline, or I can use, for example, rectangles.
Yeah, you can use rectangles. There's nothing wrong with that. The polyline will give you more flexibility long term because it's not, I can draw something that is not a rectangle if I wanted to, but there's no reason that you couldn't use rectangles. So when I was drawing the windows, I could create a rectangle just as easily, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Thank you.
The only thing you have to be careful of is that these are joined rather than being individual line segments. There's no harm in having them as individual line segments. However, if they were, so let me take this curve and make it into individuals here. I'm just going to explode it. So see how these are all separate? They're separate, etc. When you got to the make curve or the make hole part right here, it's going to ask for a planar closed curve, and you don't have one here, so it won't let you select it. So I would have to go in and I would have to join these four together in order to use the make hole. like that. I'd have to go back and join them. So I'd select them and then type join. Now I could do the make hole. I should point out that these windows were all rectangles, but there's no reason they have to be. So if I came in here with like an arc and I wanted, no, it's on it. Sorry, it's in the wrong plane. I'm just doing a rotate 3D, same as I did with the elevation view. Like that. Let me take this and my rectangle here. I'm going to trim those. So I'll select both of those, type in trim. I'm going to get rid of the bottom part of that curve and the top part of that. And then I would join them together. Oops, I have to hit enter first and then join. Now I've got that shape as a planar closed curve right there. And I can do the make hole with that. So I can come over here to make hole. There's my, oops, sorry, I got to select them all. There we go. Enter. And my depth would be the thickness of the wall. And now I've created that as an opening. So, you know, I wasn't emphasizing the arches because we were just sticking with basic, but you can use this make hole with any shape as long as it's a closed shape. That's the key.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So our goal here today is to extrude these walls, use the project command to project your elevation onto these surfaces, and then use the make hole or trim. Hopefully it's the make hole. I'd like you to get used to that as an operation to cut through your building, at least in a few spots. This is what we're looking for. When I'm done, I just need to do a screen capture of this. That's what you'll be turning in for your exercise 203. I'll click this little down triangle next to the view here, and I'm going to go to my capture, to file. What you see is what you get right here. I'll go ahead and say okay, and it's going to ask me where I want to save it. Let's make sure it goes to my OneDrive and into today's folder. So we're in 203. And let's change this. This is exercise 203, fall 22. And I'll go ahead and click on save. And that saves that screen capture. That's what I'm turning in. I'm going to double check and run back here and make sure I didn't forget anything. Drawing elevations, layers, rotate 3D, extrude, project, finish drawing and post. Okay, so we've got it all. So that's what you're going to be doing. And so I just walked you through that in kind of this format. I will process the lecture and I'll get it up as soon as I can. Usually it takes a little bit of time. My computer, I've been having issues with it, so it might take a little bit longer, but I'm going to try to have it up by tonight so you guys can go back and review along the way. We do have our lab check-ins this week, so I need you to come to at least one session of the lab check-ins. The session times are listed on the home page here. Oh, I thought I had them listed there. I don't have them listed there. Let's see. It's 12:20 to 12:50, 1 to 1:30, and 1:40 to 2:10. So it's 30-minute windows. You can come to any one of those either today or on Wednesday. We're not going through too much in those sessions, but it's an opportunity for you to get some feedback, ask questions. If you got stuck on something in exercise 202, for example, we can go through it and kind of walk our way through that stuff. Okay. If you guys have any questions, you're welcome to stick around. I'm going to take a brief break. Yes, and yes, we start back at 12:20, so that's fine. So I'll be back at 12:20. And if you guys want to stick around and get your first one out of the way, that's that's perfect. Any other questions before I let you go?